I never thought I would end up in a 3-month battle with my own neighborhood association over something as simple as staying warm in winter. But that's exactly what happened when I installed convection heaters in my house last November. My name is Zachary Johnston, and I had just moved into the Pleasant Valley Estates in Boise, Idaho, about 6 months before all this drama started. The neighborhood looked perfect when I bought my house, a beautiful 2-story colonial with a decent yard and what I thought were reasonable HOA fees. The previous owners had mentioned the association was active, but I didn't think much of it at the time. That was my first mistake. The house came with an ancient furnace that worked fine for the first few months, but when October rolled around and the temperatures started dropping, I noticed my heating bills were astronomical. We're talking $400 a month just to keep the place at 68 degrees. I did some research and discovered that the furnace was over 30 years old and running at maybe 50% efficiency. Getting a new furnace installed would cost me somewhere around $12,000, which I didn't have after dropping most of my savings on the down payment. That's when my buddy Marcus told me about convection heaters. He had installed them in his rental properties and swore by them. They were energy efficient, cost-effective, and could heat specific rooms without wasting money on empty spaces. It made perfect sense for my situation. I lived alone and didn't need to heat the entire house all the time. I could use the convection heaters in whatever room I was in and save a fortune on utilities. I spent about a week researching different models and reading reviews. I settled on some high-quality European units that had excellent safety ratings and were designed for permanent installation. The total cost for 4 units plus installation would be around $3,000, a fraction of what a new furnace would cost. I called up a certified electrician named Tom Rivera, who had great reviews, and scheduled him to come out for a consultation. Tom showed up on a Tuesday morning in early November. He was a stocky guy in his 50s with gray hair and the kind of confident demeanor that comes from decades of experience. He walked through my house, examined the electrical panel, measured the rooms, and took notes on his tablet. "Your panel can definitely handle these units," Tom said, standing in my living room. "You've got a 200-amp service, and these heaters are pretty efficient. We'll need to run dedicated circuits for each one, but that's standard procedure. Everything will be up to code, permitted through the city, the whole 9 yards. How long will the installation take?" I asked. 2 days, maybe 3 at most. I'll need to run the wiring, install the units, and then we'll have the city inspector come out to sign off on everything." "Sounds perfect. When can you start?" "I've got an opening next week. I'll pull the permits this Friday, and we can start Monday if that works for you." We shook hands, and I felt relieved. I'd be warm and comfortable without breaking the bank. Everything seemed straightforward and simple. I should have known better. Tom and his apprentice showed up bright and early the following Monday morning. I had taken the week off work to be present during the installation, partly because I was curious about the process, and partly because I didn't want to leave strangers alone in my house all day. They got to work immediately, mapping out the wiring routes and drilling holes where needed. The first unit went into my bedroom. Tom mounted it on the wall beneath the window, ran the wiring through the wall cavity, and connected everything at the panel. The second unit went into my home office where I spent most of my time. The third went in the living room, and the fourth in the guest bedroom that I used as a workout space. By Wednesday afternoon, all 4 units were installed and operational. Tom showed me how to use the controls, explained the safety features, and gave me copies of all the documentation, including the manufacturer specifications and warranty information. "The city inspector is coming tomorrow morning at 10, Tom said as he packed up his tools. "It's just a formality. Everything is textbook perfect. You'll have your certificate of compliance by tomorrow afternoon." The inspector showed up right on time Thursday morning. He was a younger guy named David Chen who seemed to know his stuff. He spent about an hour checking Tom's work, testing the circuits, examining the installations, and reviewing the permits. Finally, he signed off on everything and handed me the approval paperwork. "Clean installation," David said. "These are nice units, should serve you well." I thanked him and he left. I cranked up the heaters and spent the next few days enjoying my warm, comfortable home while watching my utility bill predictions drop dramatically. For about a week, life was perfect. Then I got the letter. It arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon. A crisp white envelope with the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA return address printed in the corner. I opened it while standing at my kitchen counter, expecting maybe a reminder about garbage day or a notice about a community event. Instead, I found a violation notice. "Dear Mr. Johnston," it read, "it has come to our attention that you have installed heating appliances on the exterior walls of your residence without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Per Article 7, Section 3 of the Pleasant Valley Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, any external modifications to a residence must receive written approval before installation. You are hereby ordered to remove these installations within 30 days or face fines of $50 per day until compliance is achieved. Please contact the HOA office to schedule an ARC hearing. Sincerely, Patricia Hendricks, HOA President." I read the letter 3 times trying to make sense of it. External modifications. The heaters were inside my house. They were mounted on interior walls. The only external component was the electrical wiring, which was completely hidden inside the walls and ran to my electrical panel like every other appliance in the house. I called the HOA office immediately. A bored-sounding woman answered and transferred me to Patricia Hendricks without asking what I needed. "This is Patricia." Her voice was sharp and clipped. "Hi, this is Zachary Johnston from 42 Maple Drive. I just received a violation notice about my convection heaters, and I think there might be some confusion." "There's no confusion, Mr. Johnston. You installed equipment without approval. But they're inside my house. They're just heaters. I don't understand how this requires HOA approval." "Anything that alters the appearance or structure of your home requires approval. Those are the rules everyone agreed to when they purchased property here." "I didn't alter the appearance of my home. You can't even see these heaters from outside. They're inside on my interior walls." "I've seen the photograph, Mr. Johnston. The units are clearly visible." "Photograph? What photograph?" We received a complaint with photographic evidence. "The units are mounted on your walls and visible through your windows from the street." My head was spinning. Someone had taken pictures of the inside of my house through my windows and reported me to the HOA. "Who complained?" I asked. "We don't disclose that information. Now, you have 30 days to remove the units or request a hearing with the ARC. Those are your options." "This is insane." "They're just heaters. I had them professionally installed by a licensed electrician. Everything is permitted and inspected by the city. City permits don't supersede HOA rules, Mr. Johnston. 30 days. She hung up. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone in disbelief. This couldn't be real. I had bought a house, installed heaters in my own home, followed all applicable laws and building codes, and now my neighborhood association was threatening to fine me for it. I spent the rest of the evening reading through the massive binder of HOA documents that had been included with my closing paperwork. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions document was 67 pages of dense legal text. I found Article 7, Section 3. It stated that exterior modifications required approval, including but not limited to changes to siding, roofing, windows, doors, landscaping, and any structural changes visible from neighboring properties or common areas. The language was vague and broad, probably intentionally so. But my heaters were appliances, not structural changes. They were no different from a wall-mounted television or a bookshelf. The fact that someone could see them through my window seemed like an absurd justification for requiring HOA approval. I decided to request the hearing. I wasn't going to remove perfectly good, legally installed heaters because some busybody neighbor didn't like the look of them through my window. I called the HOA office the next morning and scheduled a hearing for the following week. The hearing was held at the community center on a Tuesday evening. The Architectural Review Committee consisted of 3 people. Patricia Hendricks, a thin woman in her early 50s with short blonde hair and the kind of pinched expression that suggested she was perpetually disappointed in everyone around her. Robert Marsh, a retired banker in his 60s who barely looked up from his phone during the entire proceeding. And Linda Carver, a nervous-looking woman in her 40s who kept fidgeting with her pen. I brought all my documentation, the permits, the inspection certificates, the manufacturer specifications, photos of the installations, and a letter from Tom Rivera explaining the work he had done and confirming everything was installed to code. Patricia called the meeting to order and read the violation notice aloud. Then she looked at me expectantly. "Thank you for the opportunity to address this," I began, keeping my voice calm and professional. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of these installations. The convection heaters are interior appliances, similar to a water heater or an air conditioning unit. They don't modify the exterior appearance of the home in any way. They're mounted on interior walls and are only visible if someone deliberately looks through my windows." "The units are visible from the street," Patricia interrupted. "That makes them subject to ARC approval. With respect, Mrs. Hendricks, if that's the standard, then everything in my house would require approval. My furniture, my curtains, my wall art. Anything visible through a window would need committee permission. That can't be the intent of the rule. The rule is clear, Mr. Johnston. External modifications require approval. But these aren't external modifications. They're interior appliances." Robert finally looked up from his phone. "Do they have any external components, vents or exhausts?" "No, sir. They're electric convection heaters. They're completely self-contained. The only connection is to the electrical system, just like any other appliance." Linda spoke up quietly. "Were they installed by a professional?" "Yes, madam. A licensed electrician. Everything was permitted through the city and inspected." I slid copies of the documentation across the table. Patricia barely glanced at the papers. "City permits don't supersede HOA authority over architectural standards." "I understand that, but these heaters don't affect any architectural standards. The exterior of my home is unchanged. My roof is the same, my siding is the same, my windows are the same. Everything is identical to the day I moved in." "You should have requested approval before installation," Patricia said firmly. "That's the process. You violated that process, and now you need to remedy the situation. By removing legally installed heating equipment from my own home. That's unreasonable. The CC and Articus are part of your deed. You agreed to follow them when you purchased the property." We went back and forth for another 20 minutes. Robert and Linda barely participated. Patricia was clearly in control and had already made up her mind. Finally, She called for a vote on whether the installations violated the CC and Articles. All in favor. Patricia raised her hand. Robert raised his without looking up from his phone. Linda hesitated, glanced at Patricia, and reluctantly raised her hand. The committee finds that the installations violate Article 7, Section 3 of the CC and Articles, Patricia announced. You have 30 days to remove them or face daily fines of $50. This is ridiculous, I said, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice. You're telling me I can't heat my own home. You can heat your home however you want, Mr. Johnston. You just need to do it in compliance with the rules. Now this hearing is adjourned. I gathered my documents and left, my hands shaking with anger. This wasn't about rules or architectural standards. This was about control. Patricia Hendricks got some kind of satisfaction from wielding power over her neighbors, and I had become her latest target. When I got home, I called Tom Rivera and explained the situation. That's completely insane, Tom said. I've installed these units in dozens of homes. I've never heard of an HOA having a problem with interior appliances. Can they actually enforce this? I'm not a lawyer, but from what you're telling me, it sounds like they're overstepping. The units don't violate any building codes or safety regulations. They're not external modifications. I'd recommend talking to an attorney who specializes in HOA law. I thanked Tom and hung up. The idea of hiring a lawyer over heaters seemed absurd, but so did removing them. I spent the next day researching HOA attorneys in Boise and found a firm that had good reviews. I called and scheduled a consultation with a lawyer named Jennifer Martinez. Jennifer's office was in a modern building downtown. She was in her late 30s, dressed professionally, and had the confident air of someone who had fought and won many battles. I explained the entire situation while she took notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled slightly. This is actually more common than you'd think, Jennifer said. HOAs often try to expand their authority beyond what's actually written in the CC and Articles. From what you've described, they're on shaky ground. So I have a case, potentially. The key question is whether these heaters constitute an exterior modification under your CC and Articles. Interior appliances are generally considered outside HOA jurisdiction. The fact that they're visible through a window is irrelevant. If that were the standard, the HOA could regulate everything in your home. That's exactly what I said. The problem is that fighting an HOA can be expensive and time-consuming. Even if you're in the right, they have the resources to drag this out. Many people just comply because it's easier. I don't want to set that precedent. If I back down on this, what's next? They'll be telling me what color towels I can hang in my bathroom if they're visible from the street. Jennifer nodded approvingly. I like your attitude. Here's what I recommend. We send them a formal letter explaining why their interpretation of the CC and Articles is incorrect and demanding they rescind the violation. If they refuse, we can file for a declaratory judgment in court. A judge would decide whether the heaters actually violate the CC and Articles. How much would that cost? The letter is about $500. If we go to court, you're looking at $5,000 to $10,000, maybe more if they really fight it. I winced. That was more than the heaters had cost in the first place. Let's start with the letter, I said. Maybe common sense will prevail. Jennifer drafted a detailed legal letter explaining that interior appliances were outside the HOA's jurisdiction, and that the heaters did not constitute exterior modifications under any reasonable interpretation of the CC and Articles. She cited several Idaho court cases involving HOA overreach and pointed out that the HOA's position was legally indefensible. The letter went out on a Friday. I received the HOA's response the following Tuesday. It was another letter from Patricia Hendricks, this time even more formal and hostile in tone. She rejected every argument in Jennifer's letter, reasserted the HOA's authority, and informed me that since I had failed to remove the heaters within 30 days, daily fines of $50 would begin accruing immediately. "They're digging in," Jennifer said when I called her. "This isn't about the heaters anymore. Patricia Hendricks sees this as a challenge to her authority. She's going to fight you on principle." "So what do? We file for declaratory judgment. I'll draft the complaint this week and we'll get it filed by next Monday. In the meantime, don't pay the fines. Paying them could be construed as accepting their authority in this matter." The legal process moved slowly. Jennifer filed the complaint in early December. The HOA had 30 days to respond, which they used every minute of. Their response came in mid-January. A 20-page document arguing that the CC and Articus gave them broad authority over any aspect of the property that could affect neighborhood aesthetics, including items visible through windows. Jennifer filed our reply, and we waited for a hearing date. Meanwhile, the alleged fines kept accumulating. By late January, the HOA claimed I owed them over $4,000. Then things got weird. I started noticing a woman walking past my house multiple times a day. She was in her mid-40s, always dressed in expensive athletic wear, and she would slow down as she passed my house and stare at the windows. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but it happened too consistently to be coincidental. One Saturday morning, I was in my front yard raking leaves when she walked past again. She stopped at the end of my driveway and just stood there, staring at my house. "Can I help you?" I called out. She startled, apparently not realizing I was outside. "Just admiring the neighborhood," she said quickly. "You walk past my house about 5 times a day and stop to stare. It's a little concerning. I live 3 streets over. I'm allowed to walk wherever I want. Of course you are. But if you have a problem with something, maybe you could just talk to me instead of lurking around taking pictures." Her eyes widened slightly. Bingo! She was the one who had reported me. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice wavered. "Sure you don't. Have a nice walk." She hurried away. I went inside and called Jennifer to tell her about the encounter. "You know her name?" Jennifer asked. "No, but I can probably find out. This is a pretty connected neighborhood. Someone will know." I posted about the encounter on the Pleasant Valley Estates Facebook group, keeping it vague but mentioning a woman who had been repeatedly walking past my house and staring at it. Within an hour, 3 neighbors had messaged me privately. Her name was Susan Carmichael, and she was Patricia Hendricks' best friend. They had been neighbors for over a decade and were apparently inseparable. "That's useful information," Jennifer said when I told her. "It suggests a personal motivation behind this complaint." The HOA is supposed to enforce rules uniformly, not selectively target residents based on personal vendettas. Our court date was finally scheduled for mid-February. Jennifer prepared thoroughly, assembling our evidence and lining up Tom Rivera to testify if needed. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept running through everything in my head, worrying that some technicality would derail our case. The hearing was held in the Ada County Courthouse. Jennifer and I arrived early. Patricia Hendricks showed up with the HOA's attorney, a smug-looking man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Bradley Warner. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judith Reynolds. She had a reputation for being no-nonsense and fair, which Jennifer said was good for us. Bradley Warner presented the HOA's case first. He argued that the CC and Articus gave the HOA broad discretion to regulate anything affecting the neighborhood's appearance, and that items visible through windows fell under that authority. "If we allow this," Warner said dramatically, "then homeowners could mount industrial equipment on their walls, hang offensive posters in their windows, or make any number of changes that would damage property values. The HOA must have the authority to maintain standards." Judge Reynolds looked skeptical. "Counsel, are you seriously suggesting that a homeowner can't choose their own interior furnishings without HOA approval?" "Not at all, Your Honor. But when those furnishings are visible from outside and affect the neighborhood's aesthetic character, yes, the HOA has legitimate oversight authority. So if Mr. Johnston hung a painting on his wall that was visible through his window, he'd need HOA approval for that too." Warner hesitated. "If the painting was offensive or inappropriate, yes." "Who decides what's offensive or inappropriate?" "The Architectural Review Committee, based on community standards." "I see. Continue." Warner went on for another 10 minutes, citing cases from other states involving HOA authority. Jennifer took notes, but looked confident. When it was our turn, Jennifer methodically dismantled the HOA's arguments. She explained that the heaters were interior appliances identical in function to a furnace, water heater, or any other household system. They didn't modify the exterior appearance of the home. They complied with all building codes and safety regulations. The only reason they were visible at all was because someone had deliberately looked through the windows from the street. The HOA's interpretation of the CC and Articus is absurdly broad, Jennifer argued. If accepted, it would give them authority over every aspect of a homeowner's interior life. Furniture, decorations, appliances, even the color of clothing visible through a window. This isn't what the CC and Articus intended, and it's not what the homeowners agreed to when they purchased their properties. She then brought up Susan Carmichael, explaining the connection between her and Patricia Hendricks, and suggesting that the violation was motivated by personal reasons rather than legitimate enforcement of community standards. "This isn't about maintaining aesthetic standards, Your Honor. This is about an HOA president using her position to harass a resident she has a personal issue with. The convection heaters are a pretext. If Mr. Johnston removes them, Miss Hendricks will find something else to complain about. This pattern of harassment needs to stop." Bradley Warner objected loudly, but Judge Reynolds raised her hand for silence. "I've heard enough," Judge Reynolds said. "I'm going to rule from the bench because this is frankly straightforward. The CC and Articus do give the HOA authority over exterior modifications. However, interior appliances are not exterior modifications, regardless of whether they're visible through a window. The heaters in question are functionally identical to a furnace or any other heating system. They're properly installed, permitted, and inspected. The HOA has no legitimate authority to regulate them." Patricia Hendricks stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, with all due respect, sit down, Miss Hendricks. I'm not finished. Furthermore, I'm troubled by the selective enforcement suggested by the evidence. If the HOA is going to enforce aesthetic standards, those standards must be applied uniformly and reasonably. Using CC and R enforcement as a tool for personal vendettas is an abuse of authority. My ruling is that the convection heaters do not violate the Pleasant Valley Estates CC and Articus. The violation notice is void. All fines are void. Mr. Johnston is under no obligation to remove the heaters. This court is adjourned." I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. Jennifer and I shook hands, thanked the judge, and walked out of the courtroom. Patricia Hendricks and Bradley Warner were huddled in the hallway, speaking in angry whispers. "Congratulations," Jennifer said. "You won. Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you. Just remember, this ruling protects you specifically. The HOA might still try to make life difficult in other ways. Keep documentation of everything and call me if they retaliate." I went home that afternoon feeling victorious. My heaters were safe. The fines were gone. I had stood up to HOA overreach and won, but Jennifer's warning proved prescient. Patricia Hendricks wasn't done with me. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 new violation notices. One claimed that my garbage cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though they were in my garage with the door closed. Another claimed that my lawn exceeded the maximum grass height of 3 inches, even though I had just mowed it the day before. The third claimed that my mailbox was damaged and needed repair, even though it was in perfect condition. Each notice came with threats of fines and hearings. It was blatant harassment, exactly what Jennifer had warned about. I took photos documenting that each complaint was false, sent them to Jennifer, and copied the entire HOA board on my responses. Most of the board members seemed embarrassed by Patricia's behavior. I received a few private messages from neighbors expressing support and apologizing for the harassment. Then, in early March, something unexpected happened. I received a call from Robert Marsh, the ARC member who had barely participated in my hearing. "Mr. Johnston, this is Robert Marsh from the HOA board. I want to apologize for how you've been treated." I was surprised. "Thank you. I appreciate that. Patricia has been out of control." Several board members are concerned about her behavior, not just with you but with other residents as well. We're calling for a special election to remove her as president and elect new leadership. That's a big step. It's necessary. We've received complaints from a dozen homeowners about Patricia's harassment and selective enforcement. Your case was just the most public example. There's a meeting next Tuesday evening at the community center. I hope you'll attend and share your experience. I agreed to attend. Jennifer advised me to speak, but to keep it factual and unemotional. The community center was packed on Tuesday evening. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had issues with Patricia Hendricks. There were at least 60 people in attendance, maybe more. Robert Marsh called the meeting to order and explained that several board members had received complaints about the current HOA president's leadership. He outlined the process for a recall vote and opened the floor for residents to speak. I was one of about 15 people who stood up and shared their stories. One couple had been fined for having a basketball hoop in their driveway, even though several other homes had them. Another man had been cited for having a commercial vehicle parked in his driveway overnight, even though he was a contractor who needed his work van, and several other residents had similar vehicles. A woman had been threatened with fines because her daughter's playground equipment was visible from the street, even though it was in their fenced backyard. The pattern was clear. Patricia had been using her position to harass people she didn't like, or who didn't conform to her vision of what the neighborhood should be. When it was my turn, I explained the situation with the heaters, the court case, and the subsequent retaliatory violation notices. I kept my voice calm and stuck to the facts. "I don't think Patricia is a bad person," I concluded, "but I think she's lost perspective. An HOA is supposed to maintain property values and ensure the neighborhood remains pleasant for everyone. It's not supposed to be a tool for one person to control their neighbors' lives. We need leadership that understands that distinction." Patricia sat in the front row, her face red and her jaw clenched. When the speaking portion ended, she stood up. "I have dedicated countless hours to this community," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I've sacrificed my time and energy to maintain standards that protect everyone's property values. If people think I'm too strict, it's only because I care about this neighborhood. But if you want to let it decline, if you want homes filled with tacky decorations and industrial equipment, then go ahead and replace me. I won't stand in your way." It was a dramatic speech, but it didn't have the effect she hoped for. The vote wasn't even close. 73% of attendees voted to remove Patricia as HOA president. Robert Marsh was elected as the interim president until a regular election could be held. Patricia stormed out of the meeting without another word. Susan Carmichael followed her, shooting dirty looks at everyone as she left. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me for speaking. A few apologized for not supporting me earlier. "I knew Patricia was giving you a hard time," one older man said, "but I didn't realize it was this bad. I should have said something." "It's okay," I told him. "The important thing is we're fixing it now." Robert Marsh approached as the crowd was dispersing. "Thank you for your testimony tonight." And again, "I apologize for not standing up to Patricia during your ARC hearing. I should have." "Water under the bridge," I said. "I'm just glad the neighborhood is moving in a better direction." Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in Pleasant Valley Estates changed noticeably. The new board leadership sent out a newsletter explaining that the HOA would focus on genuine community concerns rather than nitpicky enforcement of aesthetic rules. Several frivolous violation notices were rescinded, including all of the retaliatory ones sent to me. I thought the drama was over. I was wrong. In mid-April, I was working in my home office when I heard a loud crack from outside. I looked out the window and saw Susan Carmichael in my driveway, holding a tire iron. She had just smashed my mailbox. I grabbed my phone and ran outside. "What are you doing?" Susan spun around, wild-eyed. "You ruined everything. Patricia had to resign from the board completely. She's humiliated. She's talking about moving away. Because she was abusing her authority. That's not my fault. She was trying to maintain standards. This neighborhood is going to go downhill because of people like you who don't respect the rules." I followed the rules. Patricia made up violations to harass me. Susan raised the tire iron. "You need to leave. Move out of this neighborhood." I took a step back, my heart pounding. "You need to leave my property right now." "Or what?" Susan advanced toward me. I held up my phone. "Or I call the police. You've already committed vandalism. Don't make it worse." Susan hesitated, looking at the smashed mailbox and then at the tire iron in her hand. Reality seemed to sink in. She dropped the tire iron and backed toward the street. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice had lost its conviction. "Yes, it is. Stay away from me and my property." Susan hurried away. I called the police immediately and reported the vandalism. An officer arrived within 15 minutes and took my statement. I showed him the security camera footage from my doorbell camera, which had captured the entire incident clearly. "We'll go talk to her," the officer said. "This is pretty clear-cut vandalism. She'll likely be charged." "I also want a restraining order. She's been harassing me for months. Document everything and file a petition with the court. With this footage and your previous documentation, you should have no problem getting one approved." Susan was charged with criminal mischief and harassment. She initially pleaded not guilty, but when the prosecutor showed her attorney the doorbell camera footage, she changed her plea to guilty. She was sentenced to probation, community service, and was ordered to pay restitution for my mailbox and to stay at least 100 yards away from me and my property at all times. Patricia Hendricks and her husband quietly sold their house in May and moved to a different neighborhood. Several neighbors told me that Patricia was bitter about the whole situation and blamed me for destroying her reputation. I felt a little bad about that. I never intended to upend anyone's life. I just wanted to heat my home efficiently and affordably. But Patricia had made choices that led to her downfall. She had abused her authority, harassed residents, and refused to accept reasonable boundaries. The consequences were her own doing. Robert Marsh turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He streamlined the violation process, clarified the CC and advocacy to prevent future disputes over vague language, and created an appeal process so residents had recourse if they disagreed with board decisions. The neighborhood felt more like a community and less like a police state. By summer, my convection heaters were old news. They kept me warm and comfortable through the previous winter and would do the same the next year. My utility bills were manageable, my home was cozy, and I no longer dreaded checking my mailbox for violation notices. In July, I was in my front yard watering flowers when a young couple walked past with a toddler. They stopped and the man waved. "Hey, are you Zach Johnston?" "That's me." "I'm Mike, this is my wife Sarah. We just bought the house at the end of the block." The realtor told us about what happened with the HOA last year. We were worried about buying here because of it, but then we heard about the leadership change. People said you stood up to them and helped fix things. I just didn't want to remove legally installed heaters from my house. But yeah, I guess it worked out. Well, we appreciate it. The neighborhood seems great now. We're looking forward to living here. I chatted with them for a few more minutes, welcoming them to Pleasant Valley Estates. As they walked away, I thought about how strange the past several months had been. I had moved to Boise for a fresh start and a nice, quiet neighborhood. Instead, I had ended up in a legal battle, dealt with harassment, witnessed the downfall of an HOA president, and somehow become a minor neighborhood legend. But standing in my front yard on that warm summer evening, with my house comfortable and my heaters humming quietly inside, I felt like everything had worked out the way it should have. Sometimes standing up for what's right is complicated and expensive and stressful, but it's worth it. Tom Rivera stopped by in early August to check on the heaters and make sure everything was still working properly. I offered him a beer and we sat on my back deck. "You know, I've been installing these things for 20 years, Tom said, and I've never had a situation go sideways like yours did." "Lucky me. But you handled it right. A lot of people would have just given in and removed them. It's easier than fighting." "That's what the HOA counted on." "Exactly. They figured you'd fold. When you didn't, they didn't know what to do. Bullies never do." We talked for a while about his other projects and about how business was going. Before he left, Tom shook my hand. "Thanks for standing your ground on this. That judge's ruling has already helped me with 2 other jobs where HOAs were being difficult. It's good precedent." After Tom left, I went inside and looked at the convection heaters mounted on my walls. They were just appliances, simple machines designed to keep a space warm. But they had become symbols of something larger, the right to make reasonable decisions about your own home without interference from overzealous authorities. In September, the HOA held its annual election. Robert Marsh ran for a full term as president and won easily. 2 new board members were elected, both of them level-headed people who wanted to focus on genuine community issues rather than aesthetic micromanagement. At the first board meeting after the election, they voted to formally revise Article 7, Section 3 of the CC and advocacy, to clarify that interior appliances and furnishings were outside HOA jurisdiction, regardless of visibility from outside. They sent the amendment to every homeowner for approval. It passed with 92% support. I ran into Linda Carver, the former ARC member, at the grocery store in October. She approached me hesitantly. "Mr. Johnston, I wanted to apologize. I should have stood up to Patricia during your hearing." I knew she was wrong, but I was intimidated by her. "It's okay, I understand. Patricia was pretty intimidating. Still, it wasn't right. You were being treated unfairly and I went along with it. I'm sorry." "I appreciate that, really." We chatted briefly and went our separate ways. Her apology meant more to me than she probably realized. It was acknowledgement that the whole situation had been unjust and that people recognized it. As November rolled around and the weather turned cold again, I fired up my convection heaters for another winter. They worked perfectly, keeping my home warm while my utility bills remained reasonable. Every time I adjusted the temperature on one of the units, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. These weren't just heaters anymore. They were a reminder that I had stood up for myself and won. The holidays came and went. I hosted a small Christmas party and invited several neighbors. We ate, drank, and talked about normal neighborhood things: kids, jobs, sports, plans for the new year. Nobody mentioned the HOA drama. It was just a pleasant evening with friendly people. As I cleaned up after the party, I reflected on how much had changed in just over a year. I had moved to Pleasant Valley Estates looking for a quiet place to settle down. Instead, I had found conflict, legal battles, and harassment. But I had also found good neighbors, learned about standing up for principles, and helped create positive change in my community. The convection heaters hummed softly on the walls, keeping my home warm on a cold December night. They had been worth every penny, every hour of stress, and every dollar spent on legal fees. Not just because they heated my home efficiently, but because they represented something important: the right to live reasonably and peacefully without arbitrary interference. In January, I received a letter from the HOA. For a brief moment, my heart sank, wondering what new complaint Patricia might have drummed up before she left. But when I opened it, I found an invitation to join the Architectural Review Committee. "We're looking for members who understand the balance between maintaining community standards and respecting homeowner autonomy," the letter read. "Your experience and perspective would be valuable to the board." I thought about it for a few days. Part of me wanted to decline, to stay away from any HOA involvement after everything that had happened. But another part of me recognized an opportunity to help shape the community in a positive way, to make sure no one else went through what I had experienced. I accepted the position. At my first ARC meeting in February, we reviewed several applications for exterior modifications: a deck, a fence, a pergola. All of them were reasonable requests that followed the guidelines. We approved them all without hassle. "This is how it should work," Robert Marsh said after the meeting. "Reasonable people making reasonable decisions. No power trips, no personal agendas, just neighbors helping neighbors." I couldn't have said it better myself. By spring, Pleasant Valley Estates had fully transformed. The new board had implemented clear guidelines for violations, created a transparent appeal process, and focused on genuine quality of life issues rather than aesthetic nitpicking. Property values remained strong. The neighborhood looked great, and residents actually seemed to like living there. I still see Susan Carmichael occasionally. She lives 3 streets over, and sometimes our paths cross when I'm out walking. She avoids eye contact and gives me a wide berth, which is fine with me. I hope she's learned from the experience, but that's not my responsibility. One Saturday morning in April, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up. A man in his 30s got out and approached. "Are you Zachary Johnston?" "I am. Can I help you?" "I'm David Brennan. I live over in Riverside Estates, about 2 miles from here. Our HOA is trying to fine me for installing solar panels on my roof, even though I got all the city permits and everything is up to code. Someone told me you fought a similar battle with your HOA and won. I was hoping you might be willing to talk to me about it. I invited David into my kitchen and made coffee. For the next hour, I walked him through my experience, gave him Jennifer Martinez's contact information, and explained the legal arguments that had worked in my case. The key thing to remember, I told David, is that HOAs have limited authority. They can't just make up rules on the fly or interpret existing rules however they want. If you're following actual laws and building codes, you're on solid ground. Don't let them bully you into compliance. David thanked me profusely and left with pages of notes. A few months later, he emailed to tell me that his HOA had backed down after he hired Jennifer and threatened to file suit. His solar panels were staying put. I found myself becoming an unofficial advisor to people dealing with unreasonable HOAs. Word spread through some online forums and social media groups. I'd get calls or emails from people facing situations similar to mine. HOAs overstepping their authority, making unreasonable demands, or selectively enforcing rules to harass specific residents. I couldn't help everyone, and I wasn't a lawyer, but I could share my experience and point people toward resources. Sometimes that was enough to give someone the confidence to stand their ground. In June, I was invited to speak at a local community rights workshop about HOA overreach and homeowner protections. About 40 people attended. I talked about my experience, about the importance of documentation, about knowing your rights, and about the value of pushing back against unreasonable authority. During the Q&A session, an older woman raised her hand. "Weren't you afraid of retaliation?" "I'm having issues with my HOA, but I'm scared that if I fight them, they'll make my life miserable." "They tried to make my life miserable," I said honestly. "They sent me frivolous violation notices, threatened me with fines, and one of the president's friends even vandalized my property. But here's the thing, I documented everything. I kept records of every interaction, every letter, every violation notice. When things escalated, I had evidence of their pattern of harassment. That evidence protected me, both in court and with the police." "So you're saying we should expect retaliation?" "I'm saying you should be prepared for it. Not every HOA will retaliate, but some will. If yours does, document it meticulously. Keep records. Take photos. Save emails. If they cross legal lines, report them to the authorities. Don't suffer in silence." After the workshop, several people thanked me for speaking. A few shared their own HOA horror stories. It was clear that my experience wasn't unique. HOA overreach was a widespread problem, and people needed to know they didn't have to just accept it. As summer turned to fall, I settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work was going well, my home was comfortable, and my involvement with the Pleasant Valley Estates ARC was actually enjoyable. We reviewed applications, approved reasonable requests, and occasionally denied things that genuinely violated community standards or safety codes. But we did it fairly, consistently, and with respect for homeowners' autonomy. In October, almost exactly 2 years after the convection heater drama began, I received a letter from the Idaho State Legislature. Apparently, my court case had attracted attention from some lawmakers concerned about HOA overreach. They were drafting legislation to clarify the limits of HOA authority and strengthen homeowner protections. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to testify about my experience at a committee hearing. I agreed. In November, I drove to Boise's state capitol building and testified before the House Judiciary Committee. I told them about the heaters, the legal battle, the harassment, and the eventual resolution. I explained how the vague language in many CC and articles allowed HOAs to overreach, and how homeowners often lacked reasonable recourse. Several committee members asked questions. One representative, a woman in her 40s, seemed particularly interested. "Mr. Johnston, do you think HOAs serve a legitimate purpose, or should they be abolished entirely?" "I think they serve a legitimate purpose when they're run properly," I said. An HOA can maintain common areas, organize community events, and enforce reasonable standards that protect property values. The problem is when they exceed that mandate, when they become tools for busybodies to control their neighbors' lives. We need clearer laws defining the scope of HOA authority and stronger protections for homeowners who are treated unfairly. The committee thanked me for my testimony. The proposed legislation passed out of committee and was scheduled for a full vote in the next legislative session. I had no idea if it would actually become law, but I was proud to have contributed to the effort. By December, as my convection heaters fired up for their third winter, I felt like I had come full circle. What had started as a simple home improvement project had turned into a legal battle, reshaped my neighborhood's governance, and contributed to a broader conversation about property rights and community standards. The heaters themselves were working perfectly, still energy efficient and reliable. My winter utility bills remained manageable. On cold evenings, I'd sit in my warm living room, reading or watching TV, and occasionally glance at the heater on the wall. It was such an ordinary appliance, but it had sparked such extraordinary consequences. In late December, Robert Marsh called me. "Zach, I wanted to let you know that the board voted to name you Resident of the Year for Pleasant Valley Estates. We're going to recognize you at the annual meeting in January. I hope you'll accept." I was genuinely touched. "That's very kind. I didn't do anything special." "You stood up for what was right when it would have been easier to back down. You helped reform this community's governance. That's pretty special in my book." At the annual meeting in January, I received a plaque and a round of applause from my neighbors. It was a little embarrassing, but also gratifying. I gave a short speech thanking everyone for their support and expressing my appreciation for the community's positive direction. As I sat down, I looked around the room at my neighbors, the same people who lived on these streets when Patricia Hendricks was making everyone miserable. They looked relaxed and happy now, engaged in the meeting without fear of arbitrary enforcement or petty retaliation. This was what a community should be. People with different lives and preferences, living side by side, respecting each other's reasonable choices, and working together on genuine shared concerns. It wasn't that complicated, but it required leadership that understood the difference between legitimate community standards and personal control. In February, the Idaho legislature passed the Homeowner Protection Act, which clarified the scope of HOA authority and established clearer processes for dispute resolution. The governor signed it into law in March. While it didn't solve every problem with HOAs, it was a step in the right direction. Jennifer Martinez called to congratulate me. "Your case was cited in the legislative debate. You helped make this happen." "A lot of people helped make this happen. True, but you were the one willing to fight when it mattered. That takes courage." As spring arrived and I no longer needed the heaters daily, I had them serviced by Tom Rivera. Everything was still in perfect condition. "These units will last another 20 years easy," Tom said. "You made a good investment." "In more ways than one," I replied. Tom laughed. "Yeah, I guess you did." After Tom left, I stood in my living room looking at the heater on the wall. It was just a machine, metal and wires and heating elements. But it represented something that mattered. The principle that your home is your own, that you have the right to make reasonable decisions about how you live, and that sometimes you have to stand up to unreasonable authority. I never planned to become a neighborhood crusader or an advocate for homeowner rights. I just wanted to stay warm in winter without spending a fortune. But life has a way of pushing you into unexpected roles. Sometimes you become who you need to be to handle the situation you're in. And sometimes, a simple convection heater becomes the catalyst for meaningful change. As I write this now, in late spring, Pleasant Valley Estates is thriving. Property values are strong. The neighborhood looks beautiful, and most importantly, people enjoy living here. The new HOA leadership focuses on genuine community concerns and treats residents with respect. The Architectural Review Committee approves reasonable requests and denies unreasonable ones, always with clear explanations and fair processes. My convection heaters are off for the season, waiting quietly for next winter. They'll fire up again when the weather turns cold, keeping my home comfortable and my bills manageable. And every time I use them, I'll remember the long, strange journey they took me on, the battles fought, and the victories won. It all started with a simple goal: to heat my home efficiently. But it became about something much larger, about standing up for what's right, about resisting arbitrary authority, about building a better community, about protecting the rights that make a house a home, and that, more than anything else, is worth fighting for.